We see CEOs all over the place trying to kiss the ring. So can the Senate GOP's resistance to Donald Trump stand the test of time? Blaze News senior politics editor Chris Bedford thinks this movement is on the way out. He wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief, and he joins us now to break it all down. So Chris, how much longer does this anti-Trump GOP have?
I think it's on its last legs, at least as far as its ability to create, to shape what goes on in the White House, to control what goes on in the White House. Kind of what you've seen these last couple of weeks, its attempt. I mean, you saw it probably best laid out just yesterday when Senator Cassidy went down to the floor and started, after he voted yes on RFK Jr., and then listed off all the concessions that he demanded. It was kind of like Cassidy decided that he was now in charge of Health and Human Services. A whole lot of things would be honestly rather difficult for a senator to be able to enforce after his yes vote. But so far, they had hoped to sink a number of nominees, and we talked about this early on in the show about how Matt Gaetz's nomination had really shifted the Overton window. After that, and with pressure campaign that they weren't quite expecting, the Republicans were able to push Hegseth over the finish line, despite 3 Republican no's. J.D. Vance went down there and cast a deciding vote. They were unhappy with some aspects of RFK's Make America Healthy Again agenda, despite the fact that a growing and a very vocal part of the base is extremely in favor of this. They were also extremely against Tulsi Gabbard, and she was able to advance from committee. Part of that, I mean, it came down to courage. There was definitely members of this committee, definitely members of RFK's, including the chairman, who wanted to vote no. They kind of made that clear. But the weekend before, when Collins decided she was going to vote yes, that put Senator Young in danger. It's got 3 years until he's got a primary, but he didn't want to actually have to deal with that. He didn't want that level of pressure on him. He says he was satisfied with some of the conversations he had. I don't really believe it. He ended up voting yes. It was to step out of line was to face the most popular Republican president in generations and the majority of the American voters who actually put him there. And the last one left is Kash Patel. At least as far as very contentious nominations go. Kash Patel, it seems, has more momentum on the GOP side going into this than any of the other candidates had. Of course, there's always going to be that issue. Democrats have managed to drag it out to about 2 weeks. The chairman of the committee is 92 years old. He's been doing this a long time. He also likes decorum. He's not as hard of a hitter as you might expect. So he's given the Democrats 2 weeks. They're not going to use that to seek answers. They're not going to use that to try and come to an understanding and see if they can vote yes. They're going to use that to try and sink the nominee. But the only real threat to any of these nominees, thanks to our friend Harry Reid, who got rid of the filibuster and nuked the 60-vote threshold, the only real threat you have on this is Republicans. And Republicans who promise to be a thorn in the side of MAGA and still could cause a lot of trouble on the legislative agenda that is the smaller legislative agenda that is there, have basically been beaten at every single round by the Trump administration and by the people who push from the outside, the people who push from the inside, and honestly, a couple of good nominees. And they're in a full retreat.
Chris, I mean, obviously success breeds success. And what we have here are smashing wins with people who are obviously wavering or very anti. And so that's going to help push Kash forward. But let's look a little bit longer to the, further out in the future, because their inner hearts are not going to change. So I mean, these are not people who are going to necessarily convert truly to MAGA and Maha. So, I mean, at what point do we say it's over? And what are the flashpoints in the future where they're going to, quietly sort of try to thwart the agenda again? Is there anything looming? Do you think that'll happen? Or maybe some of these people just are politicians. Maybe they do just put their finger to the wind and actually become MAGA. How do you see this playing out over the next year?
You've got a couple primaries coming up. Young's only got a couple years, but Tillis is up next. He's a very close ally of Mitch McConnell. He's from a deep red state. There is absolutely no reason. It'd be like the Democrats getting questions from a more conservative-leaning senator in Massachusetts. You would never, ever have that with the Democratic Party, but you have that frequently with the Republicans. So he's got a couple of years. He's really going to have to behave, because we've seen the last rallies that Donald Trump is willing to throw for his own election, but we haven't seen the last on primaries. And he's going to want team players, especially in this dangerous Senate season they have for the thin Republican majority that's coming up in the midterms. You're going to see people like Cassidy, who could have been a thorn in the side, but then have to run for re-election next year in deeply red, deeply Republican Louisiana, have to face their voters. So they're afraid of this. And then, of course, there's Mitch McConnell. He's not afraid of anything. Why would you be? It reminds me of when I warned my grandfather in his 90s at the beginning that COVID would be dangerous to him, and he laughed and said, like he cared at all. Mitch McConnell seems to be along those sorts of lines. I mean, he literally fell down again in the Senate today. His legs are weak. They've always been weak because of polio, but also, let's admit it, it's because of age and balance and the way that impacts you. He's not gonna change his tune, but if he pushes too far, then I think you'll start to see a change tune from Republicans, especially at the White House. This has proven much more than the first administration to be a hands-on, aggressive White House that knows what's going on and knows how to move the levers of power. A lot of Mitch McConnell's power comes from his ability over decades to place largely middle-tier staffers throughout all of the Washington establishment, where they rise in power and they gain seniority, and they all owe it back to this network of Mitch McConnell. Well, the way you break a network is you punish it. You stop hiring those people. You stop doing business with those people. You force those people to flee. And then when the king finally retires, you're all set. And also, you got the Kentucky legislature right behind him. So Kentucky has a Democrat mayor. He's from an old Kentucky family. He's got legacy. He may be the last Democrat or governor you have for a very long time. But the legislature removed some of Mitch McConnell's staying reasons. They took away his power to appoint a replacement and said, if the senator steps down, the state party that he represents gets to choose the replacement. So they got rid of that. Mitch McConnell can only play hardball so hard before the end.
All right, Chris, well, the biggest story of the day is Politico, right? We all knew that NPR was funded by the government, but now we see that Politico has taken money from HHS, USAID, a number of other government agencies. So how do you break this down for us when you first heard the news today?
Well, this is just a real look into how the swamp operates. And all of it, of course, can be explained. These are for subscription models. This is just people paying to subscribe. But at the end of the day, if you're over 5 years taking almost $35 million in subscriptions from the federal government, from the taxpayer, then you're largely funded. Their 200-person news team that just is donated to Political Pro is funded in large part by the taxpayer. And what Politico Pro does is it counts votes. It allows these bureaucrats to count the votes, and then they sprinkle throughout it some kind of policy-centric reporting, whether it's on labor or energy or other things that, the average reader is not going to care about, but bureaucrats might care about. But largely, it's that the bureaucrats can track what's going on in Congress. We charge an exorbitant fee. We're talking $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a year to subscribe to this service. This, it turns out, is subsidizing something. So all of these publications, whether it's Politico or Axios, they're not really supposed to be broadly enjoyed. They're written for CEOs of big tech, big business. They're written for lobbyists. They're written for people who are in government. They try to make them feel warm and fuzzy. They try to help them sound like they're smart. I mean, Axios literally has this thing, sound smart, or be brief, that they put in there. And it's usually extremely mundane points. You'd have to be rather far outside of what's going on in DC to say, oh, that's an interesting point. And they sell it for exorbitant prices, and then that access goes back and forth, and then these publications defend the federal government. They defend the blob. They defend the status quo. And everyone's happy, everyone's paid, everyone's elite. They throw cocktail parties. So it was really, really encouraging today to see Caroline Leavitt come out and say, listen, the White House is canceling executive subscriptions. Because, a $35 million hole in the budget is going to have to change that kind of model. It's going to change. This is not normal reporting. This is not for the American people. This is reporting and access for elites. It's barely even considered like normal journalism. And they ought not to be. They ought not to exist in the same fashion. It's a dirty, dirty business model.
One of the best things about the exposure today of midwit elite media complex financing is that the amount of money, well, it may be small, right, in the grand scheme of things, is not small to these companies that are struggling. As we know, working at media companies, this is a large amount of money that really goes, right to the bottom line. It just goes right into the coffers. So, companies like Blaze are sitting there thinking like, oh, you can do that? We could, of course we can't, and we wouldn't. That's why we need your support. But this makes all the world of difference for struggling media companies when, no one else is reading them. So this is the way the world actually works. This is the way the midwit media, actually revolves around the sun. Now, when you look at these grants being exposed, one thing I think is a little bit amusing is that for people like us, it's almost as if, guys, you didn't know this was happening. Everyone. I have to say, there is way worse to be found yet, and I am overjoyed that it's getting the attention it deserves. But let's talk about that, because I suspect that we will discover a lot worse things as we move forward, both when it comes to government funding the media and a lot else besides.
Yeah. OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, just put out a kind of a technical-looking order yesterday afternoon that said that the chief information officers of these agencies, which used to be a protected position that could only go to careers, is now open to political appointees. And that's really important on a couple of different levels. One, that way you can recruit some of the actually excellent people from around the world who do wonderful cybersecurity, which is part of what this officer does. But the main thing is, this is the officer who's in charge of feeding information back to the secretary, back to the director of the agency. So let's say you're a Trump appointee and you come into some random agency X, and you tell the career bureaucrat, as your chief information officer, hey, I want a list of all of our spending and all of our programs. Or I would like to see the email traffic between all of our employees in the last 4 years and these 3 left-wing groups. Or I want to get search for at Politico.com. How many people have been talking to reporters? Well, maybe a functioning bureaucrat will take a couple of weeks to bring some things to you. But a lot of other people, part of the deep state, will just block you. They'll send out a 5-alarm fire. They'll have people leak to the press to undermine you. And they're usually not even the best at the job. And an information officer, someone who deals in tech, communication, policy, maybe in the 1990s, that was just kind of a bureaucratic job, but now it's become part of policy, and it's become someone who can really undermine you. So with the Trump administration opening that up to people, that just alone helps empower the secretary and the director to have that insight into their own agency, into what they've been doing and who's there, where the money's going, the communications, in a way that they haven't before. So you take some 20-year-old kid who's been building tech programs to read ancient Roman scrolls we could never unlock, put him in there, and he's going to find out a whole lot more about what's going on in the agency than you were ever going to before. So these little tweaks that were earned and learned from years of 2017 to 2021 are now being unveiled.
Well, Bedford, there's so many days that we could choose from, but I think today is actually one of my favorite news story days so far since Trump 2.0. There's so much today.
It's been absolutely, it's like drinking from a fire hose. The New York Times homepage cannot keep up with Elon Musk and Donald Trump right now. They would like to put everything they hate about them from just that day on one page. But I swear, you watch it, these stories fall right off. They cannot keep up. It's a golden age.
They can't even contain it. Bedford, thanks so much.
See you tomorrow.
Peterson, these stories are so important, though, because when you look back at Politico and you look back at the scandals, and it's the Hunter Biden laptop story, and it's censorship, and then it's all the illegal Supreme Court leaks, right? And all these things, they come through Politico. They know what they're doing because this is an outlet that'll print what they want to have out there. Yeah,
so you have a large customer of the media company, funneling it money, and they know that their audience, the people who will pay the larger subscription for the information about the votes, et cetera, They know where their bread is buttered, and that's the information that they put out. So it's very much true that this is not about speaking truth to power, right? There's an audience here that is paying them to tell them what they want to hear, both in terms of information and in terms of spin. Tell me how to spin this. I mean, that's what Axios in many ways really does for an elite class that's not actually elite, an elite midwit class that needs that information. So, there is a transaction going on, and it is in fact corrupt, and our government shouldn't be involved in it. Although I do think what Chris had a point. I mean, why not? I mean, Blaze should sell subscriptions. If we can help, we'd be providing them good information. You know, so maybe we should offer our services.
The winning will continue. Don't worry.